Little House on the Prairie holds a treasured place in television history, remembered fondly for its heartfelt take on pioneer life. Yet not every installment of the series has aged gracefully. A handful of episodes have quietly disappeared from reruns and streaming catalogs, held back in various markets because their content no longer sits comfortably with modern audiences. What turns a gentle, family-oriented show into something networks feel they need to restrict decades later? The answer lies in a mix of dated portrayals and storylines that raise real questions about representation and cultural sensitivity. Here's a closer look at why a few specific episodes remain largely unavailable. For years, Little House on the Prairie has been remembered as a warm snapshot of frontier America in the late 1800s. But among its many episodes, several have quietly vanished from syndication packages because their content doesn't match how we think about race, culture, and representation today. Most of the unease centers on outdated attitudes baked into certain storylines, the kind of thing that highlights just how far expectations around media have shifted since the show first aired. When the series ran from 1974 to 1983, it inevitably carried the fingerprints of its era. Certain plot lines and character choices, meant at the time to entertain or spark reflection, leaned on stereotypes that we now recognize as problematic. That's left broadcasters and streaming platforms with tough calls about which episodes still belong in circulation. Naturally, these decisions haven't pleased everyone. Fans, historians, and cultural commentators continue to debate whether pulling episodes does more harm than good. Some feel removing them erases a chance to talk openly about difficult chapters in television history. Others argue that certain episodes cause real damage by keeping harmful stereotypes in circulation and shouldn't be treated as casual viewing. It's worth remembering that these banned episodes are the exception, not the rule, in a series generally celebrated for themes of family and perseverance. Still, their existence is a reminder that beloved shows can carry blind spots in the time they were made, and they offer a window into how far cultural attitudes have traveled since. Much of the criticism zeroes in on how the show handled indigenous characters, people of color, and other minority groups. What passed without much scrutiny decades ago can feel jarring by today's standards, uncomfortable for viewers who grew up with the show, and outright troubling for younger audiences discovering it for the first time. Among the most frequently cited problem episodes is The Ghost, which aired in the show's 5th season. On its surface, it's a simple ghost story woven into frontier life. Dig a little deeper, though, and the elements that made it controversial come into focus. The plot centers on a character believed to be haunted by a Native American spirit. Rather than treating indigenous spirituality with any nuance, the episode leans into it as something eerie and frightening, reducing a complex belief system to a source of dread. Critics say this approach did little to build understanding and instead reinforced tired, negative cliches. The story's underlying tension between settlers and Native Americans also gets flattened into a simplistic good versus evil framework, leaving indigenous characters feeling one note rather than fully realized. Because the show carried an educational reputation and reached a broad family audience, this kind of shallow treatment landed with extra weight. Costuming, dialogue, and mannerisms used to characterize Native American figures in the episode reflect broader patterns from that era of television, when minority groups were often reduced to curiosities or caricatures rather than treated as real people. The overall tone, suspenseful and unsettling, tied specifically to indigenous spiritual beliefs, struck many viewers as inappropriate for a family show, and that discomfort helped push the episode out of rotation. Today, many networks simply skip The Ghost in their rerun schedules, citing viewer complaints and cultural sensitivity. Streaming platforms tend to either omit it entirely or attach a content warning. Defenders argue the episode was attempting, however clumsily, to reflect the period and open a conversation about how portrayals evolve over time. For most audiences, though, the discomfort has outweighed any educational value, effectively taking the episode out of circulation. Another episode that's largely disappeared from view is The Election, which aired during Season 6. The story follows Mr. Edwards as he runs for local office, but becomes entangled with racial tension and voter manipulation along the way. While political storylines weren't unusual for the series, this one drew criticism for how it handled fairness and portrayed minority characters. Much of the concern centers on how the episode depicts the town's indigenous and black residents navigating barriers to political participation. It reflects a common 1970s TV approach of tackling weighty topics through oversimplified storytelling. Well-intentioned, perhaps, but prone to reinforcing the very stereotypes it may have meant to critique. Critics say the episode reduced serious racial issues to something too tidy and left audiences with a muddled takeaway. The episode also uses comic exaggeration in ways that feel jarring today, undercutting the seriousness of discrimination and disenfranchisement by playing them partly for laughs. Political corruption in the storyline gets treated almost like harmless mischief rather than a genuine breach of trust, which struck later viewers as tone-deaf given the real stakes involved for marginalized communities during that period. As a result, many broadcasters have chosen to leave the election out of rerun packages, and it's commonly missing from streaming libraries too. Some defenders point out the episode was trying to highlight the value of civic participation, even if the execution hasn't held up. But public reaction has generally sided with the critics, cementing this as one of the more consistently excluded episodes in the series' catalog. Perhaps the most discussed of the banned episodes is The Name of War, a story built around a character named Flaming Eagle, who's torn between his native heritage and the world of the white settlers around him. The writers appear to have been aiming for a thoughtful exploration of cultural assimilation, but the final product drew significant backlash. One major complaint is how thinly Native American customs and characters are drawn. Rather than offering a genuine, developed portrait of indigenous life, the episode slips into a romanticized, surface-level version of the culture, leaving many viewers wanting a far more careful treatment of the subject. The casting choices didn't help matters either. Non-Native actors were cast in Native American roles, a common but now widely criticized practice from that period of television. It's a decision that underscores a broader, ongoing conversation about giving indigenous performers the opportunity to tell their own stories. Critics have also pointed out that Flaming Eagle's arc edges toward the noble savage trope, the familiar and damaging idea of Native characters as tragic figures destined for a sorrowful end. The episode's uneven tone, swinging between sincerity and melodrama, only added to the sense that the material didn't quite know what it wanted to say, even though the underlying intent may have been to build empathy. Given these issues, The Name of War has largely been pulled from syndication and streaming. Distributors appear to have judged it too risky for a cultural climate that's increasingly attentive to accurate, respectful representation of indigenous communities. Even so, the episode remains a frequent reference point in discussions about how television historically handled Native American stories, a case study in how good intentions can fall short without deeper research or genuine community input. To understand why these episodes exist at all, it helps to look at the television landscape of the time. Shows produced in the 1970s operated within a much narrower understanding of race and representation than we have today. Broader civil rights movements were reshaping American society, but television often lagged behind in translating those shifts into thoughtful storytelling. Broadcast norms of the era tolerated broad, generalized portrayals of minority groups, often built on familiar tropes rather than fully developed characters. This was partly a product of limited input from the communities being depicted, and partly a reflection of what producers assumed a mostly white, middle-class audience would accept. Cultural consultation, now considered standard practice for any production dealing with underrepresented communities, essentially didn't exist at the time. Writers frequently relied on secondhand or outdated sources rather than working directly with indigenous advisors or experts, which meant misconceptions could slip through even when the creative team believed they were telling a meaningful story.